the light. Okay, everything clear. So yes, we are going back to the marshes or to the Ljubljana Mur, as you please. Regarding the official translation of Ljubljansko barje, I will use Ljubljana Mur, and yes, my presentation is a sequel of Natasha's early representation. Only that I will go in the period after the Second World War. I will talk about the period between 1945 roughly until 1965. My focus will be on the socialist agricultural enterprises which eventually developed at that time. And please keep in mind, I will speak about, and this agricultural enterprise is owned by city or the state only. I won't talk about the collective farms which also existed at least at the beginning period of the time I will speak. I will also not talk about the private farmers. I will talk only about these agricultural enterprises which were founded on the nationalized land after agrarian reform in 1945 and 1946, or were rented from the private peasants. And some of them existed until the bitter end, until the late of the 1980s, but mostly I will talk today about the first 2 decades. But for the very beginning, I would like to start to show you to present you 2 very interesting quotes. The first one I was able to obtain from the archive of Ljubljana and belongs to the file of the city economy of Jesenkovo. This was actually one of the first socialist cities' agricultural enterprises, some sort of the nucleus from which everything started to develop on the Ljubljana marshes. It is not signed, also undated, but my wild guess would be it was a propaganda leaflet, maybe even an article submitted to some newspaper or to some magazine, but as far as I was able to investigate the current publications at the time, I was not able to find anything. So there is a chance it was never published. But here, as you see, it's written so romantically. It recalls a little bit this Sergei Eisenstein's movie about old and the new, the general line about the poetry of tractors which are coming. And yes, a victory over the marshes of Ljubljana Mur is anticipated here. On the other side, the author is known and very known, Anton Melik, undisputable authority, the most famous geographer in Slovenian history, a man who knew a great deal about the marshes, and he actually made his PhD in 1927 about Ljubljana marshes. But after the Second World War, he published a book, a popular account of the first 5-year plan in Slovenia and also in Yugoslavia. He also here, but unlike this pure propaganda piece, he also mentioned many difficulties that were faced by the transformation of the marshes. For example, he said that the weeds is not defeated at the Ljubljana marshes. Weeds as an obstacle. So for him, a triumph, a complete triumph, and the battle against the weeds was necessary. I can tell you that a victory over the marshes of Ljubljana Mur was never achieved. And neither was the victory against the weeds. So what actually happened? If I represent you my key points from my point of view, let's please be focused on the point number 1 and the point number 2. Well, what happened during the socialism? The socialist agricultural enterprises essentially made a revolution over there, but, and that is the most important, a failed revolution. The revolution failed because the socialization of the land at the Ljubljana Mur was never accomplished. A socialist sector never had more than 30% of land under its control. The rest was under the control of private peasants, of private farmers. And if you take a look on this map I was able to obtain, it is from the early 1960s. You can see these socialist agriculture enterprises are in a way like an archipelago in the sea, more than less, or at least in a lake of private peasants. This, if I say that the revolution, the socialist revolution in the countryside was a failure, that is because the collectivization failed, or more precisely, it was allowed to fail. Not like in the Hungary or Eastern Germany or something like that. So the socialism at the countryside, including at the Ljubljana marshes, was something ambiguous. And this ambiguity has a correlation in the environmental ambiguity of the Ljubljana Mur. If you remember, our director, Andrej Pančur, at the beginning said, well, we are here on the Ljubljana marshes, but this is actually not a marsh. I mean, this is not actually a swamp anymore. But you must understand that already in 20s, geographer Anton Melik said that it's quite disputable that due to the anthropogenic interventions here, we are actually talking about the marshes here. Is this marshes or not? And also after the Second World, most of geographers, as much as I was able to read, they also are really not so sure how to characterize this big area of 18,000 hectares of land. They say it because of the human interventions stopped or interrupted the natural processes of the marshes and beyond redemption. That is especially because the pit, or if we say in Slovenian, šota, was, I mean, completely, robbed out already at the turn of the century, at the beginning of the 21st century, but the pit is something very essential for the marshes. But anyway, this place still has many other characteristics of marshes. It's watery. There are special weeds growing here as nowhere else. But yet, however, one cannot, but not to see the anthropogenic interventions here. So I will show you some of the pictures of these agricultural enterprises. Please keep in mind these pictures are from the early 60s. You can see very important drainage ditches or ditches for the water. During the socialism, there was a network of these ditches around 300 kilometers. This is in the 60s. You have a bulldozer for the melioration works. Only in the 60s, they actually really employed mechanization. Before that, they did it more than less with their hands, with shuffle. The human labor did it. Okay, this we are talking about the 60s, when they invested more money to this agriculture, and these enterprises were quite modern. Now, I will discuss more about the data, namely the informations in these two tables. Both of them discuss or explain the crucial developments in the agricultural and also environmental sectors at the Ljubljansko barje from 40s and till 60s. I think the most important fact is that the Ljubljana More was not even mentioned in the first 5-year plan, which was introduced in Slovenia and Yugoslavia in 1947. Unlike other areas of water, Drava River Basin was mentioned, also Sava River, Karst, Ercirknica Lake, but not Ljubljana More, which meant, and also others, dozens of documents I was able to read about these companies, they didn't have money, they were underfinanced. That is why they relied mostly on the self-exploitation, a big exploitation of labor. They also used in the first years after the Second World War POWs, German POWs, some of them were also Italians, but above all they relied on the shock brigades, on the voluntary work. But it didn't actually work out. Because they didn't have enough money, because they were not financed properly, most of the facilities, buildings were actually constructed by employed labor force. Those who were supposed to do farming job, they were also constructors. And that is why at the beginning, in the first year, there were serious problems. The workers quit their jobs. The directors, managers in these agricultural companies used to complain more that they lack workers than they complained the water conditions. Another thing which I found it really astonishing throughout all the period, that the managers actually in their reports to the higher authorities didn't complain too much on the water, on the marsh conditions, as I personally expected that they would. Especially at the beginning, when I read reports, the plans of construction, the plans of tillage the land, I can hardly find any thoughts about the environment, about the environmental risks they are facing. It appears to me that the managers were behaving like they are managers anywhere else in Slovenia. They were paying so little attention to the special conditions of their job. Well, for all of these peculiarities, this company faced several problems. This voluntary work, shock brigade work, actually didn't work because they were lacking appropriate equipment. Boots, for example, they didn't have boots. That was one problem. They didn't have mechanization. At the beginning, and that is one of the biggest contradictions, these companies, estates were established during the first 5-year plan. Plan economy was supposed to be a rational economy, but in fact it was not. Because during the first years, as much as I read these reports and documents, the first managers didn't even know what are the parcels of their land, which land actually belongs to them. They didn't know it. Another very strange thing is that it's absolutely not clear who had a higher hand over Ljubljansko barje, Ljubljana More as a whole during 1948 and 1951. As Natasha told us, before that there was a head committee for development of Ljubljana More, or drainage, as Natasha told us. This institution actually worked until 1948. Then it was disbanded, but it is entirely not clear what came after. Ljubljansko barje was managed between two agents. One of them, there were local authorities, on the other side, socialist agriculture. Each of these agents were conducting their own work many times, I think, in contradiction. At the same time, the people who were once a member of this committee tried to persuade the new authorities that it's absolutely necessary to look after, to maintain Ljubljana Mur as a whole, not partially. And that was the biggest problem, because they started to cultivate and manage Ljubljana Mur in these decisive years completely partially, individually. And then there was a natural, I wouldn't say disaster, but there were floods in 1948. What is very interesting about those floods is I was not able to find any reports about them in the newspapers at the time. But the Jesenkovo, once again, estate achieved at that year of the floods only 50% of the planned targets. And really, I found it astonishing. They didn't write anything about this at all. And also about the hardships, about the problems of these agricultural estates. Personally, yet I was not able to find any reports about progresses or setbacks in the papers, which is very interesting because at the same time we had some here above works on the melioration works on the Pšata rivers, which were by the media very good covered. There were melioration going on, something similar than as in Ljubljansko Barje. But the papers praised the works, also involvement of shocking brigades, including the ballet ensemble, which paid a visit to the workers at the Pšata River, dancing to entertain the voluntary workers. But it was actually nothing published about the works, about the progress or setbacks at the Ljubljana Mur at the time. And I don't really know what was the reason why they didn't do it. Because even failures at the time in socialist press sometimes were published in order to motivate. Yeah. Okay, eventually in the 50s, many institutions were founded, at least that had a hand or supervision over the Ljubljana Mur as a whole, but not before 1951, as far as the archival documents concerned. So, I mean, what actually were doing these agricultural enterprises? Their problem was that they beginning tried to grow everything, from the vegetables to potatoes, tomatoes, corn, wheats, but also pig breeding and husbandry. Regarding the environmental risk, the most risky, as many geographers outlined, was pig breeding, but also cow or animal husbandry was also risky because maybe my colleague Valentina will correct me, but at this estate, Horiul, which was a part of this complex, they had cows, but there was they had cows, the barns, but below that there was a groundwater, as far as I know, and that was serious ecological risk. Another ecological risk were fertilizers. Because there was not enough money, they actually didn't have a real fertilizers. Okay, yesterday we heard by our colleague Teresa, who was talking to us, describing the risks about the fertilizers and insecticide and all of that. But in the first period, in the first plan, the year of the first year plan, they didn't have real fertilizers. They used whatever else. For example, including industrial waste, I found in the report, to fertilize the land. It was not clear, it was not written what industrial waste, but it sounds cringe to me. They also used litter from the city garbage, everything. So that was very important. That certainly was how much? That was certainly a big environmental risk. So, I mean, I will say that in the 60s, situation became somehow better, because if you see here, all of this used to be, with Jesenkova as the first, then Bokalce, were autonomous enterprises owned by the city. But in 1959, they all merged in the big estate, called Estate Ljubljansko Barje. In the late 50s and early 60s, serious finances, serious money, resources were allocated for serious research of Ljubljana more, but mechanization. But the other paradox then emerged. They spent a lot of money to dig trenches for irrigation, these ditches. But the more ditches they did, the more additional costs came, because these ditches had to be cleaned, maintained. And that is why in the 60s, more Ljubljana more became cultivated, more were ditches, more expensive were the gross costs of the production of milk, for example. And that is why this company in the 60s were in red. They were producing a huge amount of milk, a good amount of milk, 30% of Ljubljana needs by day, and yet the price of production was very high because of the maintenance of this. And that is why, as the decades of late socialism progressed, they stopped cultivation, and weed, pleveu, progressed over there, including deadly horsetail. Okay. Maybe I will add something more also in discussion, so I will finish here. Thank you.